That concludes the proponents for the bill. We now turn to the opponents. Charlotte Ennis.
Chairman and committee members, my name is Charlotte Ennis. I was abused at age 7 by a teenage neighbor, which makes me a sexual abuse survivor. Strangely, I am firmly against SB 69. This bill lacks sufficient language to protect those who may be falsely accused years in the future. I do not see any difference in the anguish, long-term ill effects, or personal devastation experienced by those abused or those falsely accused. I know victims of both. Both had their lives grotesquely ripped apart. I'm a member of Covenant Life Church. In 2013, our church was the subject of an egregious and even bizarre $50 million class action suit alleging child sexual abuse and cover-up that was undoubtedly false. This lawsuit was agonizing, expensive, and emotionally draining for thousands of people. It was covered in the international press.
Are you referring to the case of Nathaniel Nate Morales, who was a youth group leader at Covenant Life Church?
No, that was a separate case.
Are you familiar with that case?
Yes, I am.
So, but I just pulled this up. I didn't know anything about it before. I thought this was the one you were referring to. He was criminally convicted 2 years ago of sexually abusing 3 young boys between 1983 and 1991 in connection with his service at the church.
Right. He was not an employee of the church.
Okay. One of the accusers, who I guess was vindicated in this case, is named Ms. Palmer. Do you know her?
That was another case. That's the one I was going to actually testify against her testimony.
Well, okay. In this article, she says that the Covenant Life Church is at least partly to blame for this man's criminal predatory activities towards the children. So it looks like the church, whether it's deliberately involved in these cases or not, has become something of a clearinghouse for predatory sexual activities against children.
I would completely disagree with that.
Was this criminal conviction a false conviction of Morales?
It was a criminal conviction of a sexual abuser who sexually abused boys in their homes, not on church property. And there was no one who testified, and there were a lot of people who testified. No one testified that the church told them not to report. Under the law, and I'm not a lawyer, but I'm real familiar with this. I used to be a news researcher for a news organization. Under the law, pastors are not required reporters. When this case came, when these kinds of things started to come to light, the pastors were not and still are not required to report. The families were required.
Let me just ask you about that if I could. At least in this article, Palmer said Covenant Life Church has a long-standing reputation of burying sex abuse allegations. In fact, during Morales' trial, public defender Alan Drew drilled former pastor Grant Lehman while on the stand. Drew, quote, "Did you have an obligation to report the alleged abuse?" Lehman, "I believe so." Drew, "And you did not?" Lehman, "No, I did not."
Okay, I know Grant Lehman, and I've talked to him about his testimony. And for those of you here who are lawyers, you can probably understand this. I believe that, first of all, it was the defense attorney that grilled him. The
Yes.
state's attorney made some comments after saying which is probably not in that article, saying the pastors committed no crime. However, I believe that, now I'll just say what I understand, it's hearsay, but I believe that the rest of Grant's sentence was, I did not know it, or I should have, knowing what I know now. But at the time when all this happened, Grant had no idea.
This is my final question. Obviously, we're not going to be able to relitigate or litigate for the first time a series of convictions that took place to people working with the church and so on. But one dynamic that I notice in these hearings that we have is we have very powerful, specific, detailed, individual recollections and testimony by victims of the abuse. And then sometimes we have people come forward, like you, perfectly well-intentioned, who are standing up for an institution, and you seem to be very defensive and guarded about the institution generally, this particular church, and the point is to try to discredit all of the testimony. At least speaking for myself, I'm not speaking for any of the senators, my patience has run out for that approach to this problem. I find the evidence overwhelming and devastating that this is really happening in these cases. And if it didn't happen in your church, then all the better for you. But there are people out there who are real victims who are trying to deal with the trauma caused by child sexual predators.
Forces sexual awareness on a child. Unfortunately, now I've experienced the nightmare of a false accusation. Please try to imagine living this nightmare as I tell you about the last 3 years. In 2013, in a lawsuit against my church, the same Covenant Life Church, a woman accused my husband and 3 others of molesting her 25 years earlier.
Is this in Maryland where this happened? And this was in Montgomery County? And have you ever been down to testify on this legislation before? Because I hadn't recalled seeing you. How'd you find out about the hearing and everything? Did you find out yourself, or did somebody call you and ask you to come and testify?
I think I heard about it on social media.
Do you remember who you heard it from on social media?
Pam Palmer.
And who's Pam Palmer?
Pam Palmer, who testified here today.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Just take a deep breath and you're good. I'm somewhat familiar with the case, but not very much. How did this? And I'm sorry if I missed it. In court, how did this turn out for your church?
It didn't go to court. It was dismissed on the statute of limitations.
Okay, so that got you. Okay.
But that took a couple years. You know, those 2 years were. Can you imagine how horrible they were?